أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My dear respected brothers and sisters, welcome to the Muslim Freud course. We have about 20 people out of, I think, about 45. So hopefully, inshallah, others will join soon. If you are not able to hear me, please do let me know, inshallah, and I will hopefully get that sorted bidhnillahi ta'ala. Just before we begin, inshallah, I'm sure everyone has read or you received an email with the access to the Mawarid course page on the Muslim Freud, and the document, the course notes that inshallah we'll be going through today. You've not received the slides yet. Inshallah, after the course, you will receive that inshallah for your own personal benefit, but most of it is already in the document. The Islamic side, inshallah, will be covering tomorrow. That a lot of the slides will cover, inshallah. Some of the information is not in the actual document. The document provides the framework, the overall content of the course, inshallah. Before we begin, just perhaps some ground rules, inshallah. While you are joining the class online, please unmute yourself. You have the capacity to mute and unmute yourself, inshallah. We will, inshallah, have discussions, but if you want to ask any questions, I'll give time and opportunity to do that, inshallah. If you don't want to unmute yourself and speak online, then you can ask your questions on the chat. So inshallah, I'll be able to read, and also everyone else can also read, inshallah. But while I am speaking, while I'm delivering the content, please unmute yourself, inshallah. We will start now. We will have a break around 4 o'clock, 4:10 for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, inshallah. And then we'll resume after 20 minutes or half an hour maximum, inshallah. And then we will continue until 5:45, 6 o'clock, bidhnillahi ta'ala today, and similar timings will happen tomorrow, inshallah. So today we're going to be covering the first aspect of the course, which really very in a brief manner outlines the basic concepts of Freuderian psychoanalysis, inshallah. We'll look at briefly about his life, his own personality perhaps, and his upbringing and what he achieved, the accomplishments. Really important to understand, and I'll explain why that, inshallah, in a few moments. And then we'll go into some of Freud's or psychoanalysis, philosophical assumptions, inshallah. And throughout the course, what I will do, so the first half today, inshallah, more about outlining Freud, his concepts, his philosophies, even his theology, if you like. And then tomorrow, focus more will be given into the Islamic aspects. But throughout the course, inshallah, I will briefly mention, okay, what does Islam say about this in my understanding, in my opinion. So today I'll be doing that, inshallah, but I will not be able to go into in depth. Tomorrow, inshallah, when we look at the Islamic framework, we will, inshallah, go into more discussions and delve into the Islamic paradigm, inshallah. So alhamdulillah, we've got about 22 now people. We've had about over 50 people, 51 sign up, alhamdulillah, for this course. This is my first time delivering an online course. The Mawarid website is owned by Shaykh Shams Adduha Muhammad. So I'm just, I don't have an online platform myself. I thought, inshallah, he's kind enough to host this course for us, inshallah. And hopefully this will be a beneficial course for everyone. This course was widely publicized within the social media networks that we have, Facebook and WhatsApp and Twitter and Instagram. I'm assuming that the participants, attendees of the online course, some of you will be qualified counselors, psychologists. You will have some backgrounds in terms of counseling and psychology. Some of you may not have any background. You may have heard of Freud, because Freud is one of, as some of you may know, and we will learn inshallah, Freud, even though you're not a counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist or work in the mental health profession, you probably have heard of Freud. Freud is really everywhere in our current, even, at least in the Western context. So what I will try to do, inshallah, as I said, this is an introductory course, covering basic concepts of psychoanalysis and the going over the Islamic epistemology, Islamic framework within that. So let's begin, inshallah. As I said, I will give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, audio or visual. But if you are not able to do that, inshallah, please ask questions on the chat. So let's start. Bismillah, inshallah. Let me share the screen. I think everyone is able to view the screen, inshallah. So now, why this course? Before, inshallah, continue. Why this course? Freud is without a doubt one of the most influential contemporary psychologists or psychoanalysts in the Western framework. I mean, even in the Muslim countries, there's a lot of work has been done in terms of the philosophy of Freud and how the Arab and Muslim scholars benefited from Freud. And as I said, that even though some of you may not be psychologists or work in the mental health sector, whether it be films, Hollywood films, or even popular literature, right? Freud is there, right? Freud is, his understanding, his philosophy, right? We cannot escape it. And there's a reason for that, inshallah. Hopefully, that will become clear throughout the course within Laitan. So let's begin, inshallah. So in terms of the learning outcomes, the web page goes through in detail what the learning outcomes, inshallah. I'm going to mention briefly what they are. To be able to understand Freud's psychological framework, so we look at, inshallah, the mindset of Freud, and what the scholars and experts, people who have written about Freud and his psychoanalysis, what they have said, inshallah. To be able to understand the model of health, abnormality, psychotherapy, espoused by Freud. Number 3, to be able to understand the basic Islamic framework on the philosophical assumptions of Freudian psychology. So that's in a nutshell. I mean, this is a online, 5.5 hour course on Freud. So you'll not become an expert, because Freud is, in a way, is an enigma. Freud did not write a particular book like, this is my understanding of the human being, one particular book, or this is, he didn't write a specific book on human nature, right? He didn't write a specific, his way, there are some books is written, we'll go through it, inshallah, but scholars later on, they've read his literature, they've read his articles and papers and books that he's written, and they combined and looked at his life and his thesis or his philosophy in a holistic manner. So we'll look into that very, very briefly, inshallah. As I said, I want to have a discussion with you. Some of the ground rules I want to mention, inshallah, and one, a reminder, really, we know actions are judge by intentions. We are here, inshallah, to learn. We are here to benefit whatever we can, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So we have to have that right understanding, right intention. Some of the information, as I said, you may find you may find new, some of it you may find old. For some of you may be a reminder, inshallah. And Freud, as I said, is a complex character, right? He went through different various stages or phases in his life. Initially, he studied medicine, he studied psychiatry, he dabbled into hypnotherapy, dabbled into cult activities. So he went through different stages and phases, and throughout his life, from the beginning of his life, that formed his understanding of psychoanalysis, or his understanding of psychoanalysis and psychology in general. So we should have that understanding that he's a complex character, and we will try our best to, inshallah, highlight some of the key concepts with the Islamic framework, inshallah. Number two, please, you will, inshallah, get the slides. You've got the notes, and you'll find these notes, various different books written by scholars after Freud. Whatever we discuss, inshallah, you can discuss among your friends and colleagues, but the document that you've been sent or you'll download from the website, the slide, this is for your personal benefit. This is not to be shared publicly on a WhatsApp group or email or anything like that, inshallah. These notes or these slides specifically compiled for this course within Ta'ala. So with this in mind, let's start, inshallah. So briefly looking at Freud, his life, his achievements, what he did in terms of his educational background. You'll find some of these notes already there, inshallah. If you want to follow the slides, follow the notes, inshallah, that'll be really helpful. His full name, as you all know, is Sigmund Freud. He was of a Jewish background. His parents were Jews. They practiced the Jewish tradition. In Austria, Czech Republic. He was born on the May 6, 1856. Is the eldest of 8 children, right? 3 sons and 5 daughters. He was, from an early age, his mother for some reason favored him, and some of the expert scholars say that because he was very academically astute, and he was into his books, into reading, into studying. And when they moved to different houses and places, he was given his own study, his own room to study. And imagine 8 children, and he was given a room or a study for him to study and learn. And he excelled in academic work. He graduated top in his classes in primary or secondary. He was fluent in several languages: Greek, Latin, Hebrew, English, French, Spanish. So he was, from an early age, early 20s, was very, very accomplished human being. He decided to become a medic, and he obtained a medical degree from the University of Vienna in 1881, when he was early in his life, 25. He got married in 1886, and he had 6 children. And the youngest is one of the most prominent, you probably have heard of her, Anna Freud. And she focused on the ego and in particular, children development. And she was, she's written some books, and her work, her literature, her books are all, studied to this day by many different psychologists and psychoanalysts. And Freud, he's exposed to the writers and philosophers, experts during his of his time. He understood where he came from. He understood the philosophy of that time, of that era. As I said, he studied medicine, he studied psychiatry, he studied the mind, the mental process. And obviously, this his understanding of the unconscious, which is one of the, I mean, the most important fundamental philosophy of psychoanalysis, of Freud's psychology. And we'll go, inshallah, we'll go into that in a few moments. His father passed away in 1896. He collaborated with many different experts, but unfortunately, he fell out. And inshallah, I'm going to go into a little bit about that. He fell out, and he, in 1897, for about 3 years, right, in the early 40s, he began a process of psychoanalysis on himself, right, analyzing his dreams, exploring his own childhood memories, and he, we know that he suffered from, significant emotional problems at that time. He was worried about, finances. Obviously, he had a family to support. He was, he had heart disease. Later on, he developed bone cancer, which lasted around, I think, 10, 20 years. He was a, some say, an avid cocaine addict. Yeah, right. He was an avid cocaine addict. He was a smoker. He dabbled, initially, in order to treat patients. He wasn't anti-medicine, although he studied medicine. He wasn't anti-medicine, but he said, or he said that, or he thought that, medicine only suppresses the issues, the problems, right? It plasters the problem. It doesn't really cure the problem. And so the psychoanalysis, looks at the underlying issues, the relational issues, the intrapsychic issues, and that's the, in order for a patient or clients or human beings to become wholesome, to become healthy, we can't be giving them medicine all the time. We have to give them psychoanalysis, treat them from a psychological perspective. So he formed his understanding of psychoanalysis. He formed the Wednesday Psychological Society, which met regularly to discuss psychoanalysis and the philosophy and the ideas. This group in 1908 became was called the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, and he had famous people in that group, and he was kind of like he developed a school for himself. Alfred Adler, he became, I mean, some of you may know that he founded his own school, right? He founded his own school. Carl Jung, he also founded his own school. Otto Rank and others. So he had people around him. Although, I mean, can we describe them as his proteges or students? Not really, but we can say that they did learn from him, and perhaps he also learned from them. It was kind of like, if I want to give an analogy from the Islamic perspective, like Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Abu Hanifa was the, we did not begin to, he didn't intend to establish a madhab, but the way he developed his understanding and fiqh and usul, that he had his own council, right? He had students who were, very qualified, like, Imam al-Shaybani, Abu Yusuf, and others, Zufar, and they learned from each other, right? He would pose a question, they would discuss, and he would give them his understanding. So you can say, that Freud tried to do that. But unfortunately, Freud was a very difficult person, right? He was a very difficult person to get along with, right? Extremely difficult to get along with. He alienated many people. So Adler and Young and Rank and others, you know, they left and they formed their own schools of thought or schools of psychology. And that actually, in a way, for Freud worked out good, right? Because he really focused. I mean, he gave the impression to others that, you know, his understanding of psychoanalysis was the best, right? No one else understood psychoanalysis, you know, Young and others, right? And that obviously alienated a lot of people, and that left him a lot of free time. And he was a workaholic. I mean, he was crazy, he was mad. And what the experts and biographers of Freud say, that he used to work for, you know, 15, 18 hours, and, you know, be writing. He would be seeing patients. So he was a workaholic. Perhaps, you know, the cocaine helped him go, you know, through that. You know, imagine someone, you know, working that every single day, working that for that long period, right? He needed a fix. So perhaps the cocaine, right, helped him on that. His view on women. We're going to go into the historical context. His view on women was pretty bad, unfortunately. Although he believed that although women have super egos, we'll come to that inshallah in a few moments, their super ego was deficient to men, right? And due to this reason, they show, in his eyes, less sense of justice and are incompetent to submit to the great demands of life, right? And he felt that, he philosophized that women are easily influenced by the emotions, by the feelings, and they're very hostile in their approach and judgments. And he felt that, you know, and in some of his writing, he said that, you know, women have made fewer contributions in society and life than men, historically speaking. And it was men that contributed to the development of civilizations, right? Coming up with great ideas and inventions and discoveries. And he's, you know, and he sarcastically wrote in his writing that, you know, what have women done? What have women done apart from cooking and cleaning and weaving, you know, weaving clothes? And when we go, inshallah, we'll go to that. I mean, this understanding, Freud, as I said, he's a product of his time. As human beings, we are all product of our time. He came, you know, he was at a time where, in the Victorian era, where women were not very, they were not looked upon in a favorable manner, right? I mean, even until recently in France and in Europe, women were considered second subhuman, right? There were meetings held by men whether to, you know, to decide whether women are human beings, or whether women have, you know, intelligence. I mean, this is in Europe, right? Only perhaps 50 or 100 or 200 years ago, right? So he emerged from within that context, right? And he said that women are weaker gender than men, and they suffer more from hysteria. And obviously, the word hysteria is not really used, you know, in conventional contemporary psychology and mental health, but it was used before. He said that women suffer from hysteria, mental health more than men. And he said that, you know, in one of to quote, he said that in many families, the men are healthy, but from a social point of view, immoral to an undesirable degree, while the women are high-minded and over-refined, but severely neurotic. So he had a pretty, you know, I mean, if, you know, in our time, he was a misogynist, right? He considered women to be inferior. So this is a brief biographical sketch of his life. It's really, really important from a counseling, psychology perspective, right? is really, really important for us. I mean, I've given you a brief overview. There are many books out there that you can read about the biography, his thinking, his philosophy, philosophy at that time. And it's really important to understand that in all of the founders of various schools of psychology, be Freud, the biological school, the behavioral school, B.F. Skinner, for example, the humanistic school, Carl Rogers, and Adler and Jung. If you look at, their philosophy, their theology, their understanding, their framework, their epistemology, a lot of it was from their own experience, what they experienced. And Freud, he mentions well, the experts mentioned that he hated, or he had this adverse reaction to his father. I mean, in a way that he hated, he disliked, he was hostile towards his father, but he couldn't do anything about it because his father, right? And he had this affection and love, romantic affection and love for his mother. Like his mother, was overprotective of him, favored him, and he built that affection, romantic love, a sexual love for his mother. And obviously, he didn't do anything about it, but the emotions and feelings were there. And if you look, if you've studied Freud, and it's basically concept, we'll go over it now, inshallah. A lot of it is from his own life. Yeah, a lot of these concepts, philosophical concepts, are from his own life. And if whether it's Adler or Jung and Carl Rogers and many others, right? If you read their biography, right? Carl Rogers, for example, right? He was a womanizer. He had, he forgot about God, although he came from a really, Christian family, right? Even Freud, right? We'll discuss, inshallah, how he was anti-religion, right? And it was probably because some writers mentioned that when he was young, there was a nanny who cared for him, and he was very affectionate towards her, loved her, and she passed away. And perhaps they say that because of that, he associated, all the negative connotations and thoughts about God, that he takes away and he doesn't care and whatnot. And because of these experiences that he had, later on, his psychology, psychoanalysis was formed because of that. It's very and hence one of the major we'll discuss major criticism of psychoanalysis is very, very subjective. In fact, I would say that many of the Western conventional psychology or counseling frameworks are very, very subjective. Now, doesn't mean that we ignore our experiences. They're very, very important. And inshallah, tomorrow we'll go into it from the Islamic epistemology, and how we take our urf and custom and our personal experiences in developing our framework. But it's important to understand, really, really important to understand the historical background of Freud. And as I said, Freud, right, he emerged, when the Enlightenment worldview of the late 19th century, right, when Darwinian thought was very prevalent, right, and Victorian era, right, and Victorian era was, when Queen Victoria came to power, there was a moral mission, right, and a lot of people are talking about the slave trade, right. There was a moral mission, but she and her government at that time wanted, and in some ways, not eradicated, but in a way, by law, they eradicated slavery in England, in the UK, and and this was called the moral kind of mission of the Victorian era. So he emerged from within that, and in that time, people were very sophisticated. And he was from a very high elite background, right, middle class, upper class background. A lot of his patients were, upper class, were very wealthy and rich, were standing in society. So in that period, people are well dressed, people are educated, they're well mannered. But also during that time, the First World War was emerging. Second World War also, and he was very taken back because of that, right? And he said that he thought, and he said that, look, human beings, you know, we try to be, in a basic understanding I'm giving you here, we try to be civil, right? But underlying, underneath our skin, our clothing, we are animalistic. We are beast. And he developed his personality structure based on that, right? The id, the ego, and the super ego. So this is where, and his philosophy was Darwinian, right? With his writings, you can look at how he developed that, right? And it is within that philosophical and even theological understanding, he developed his psychoanalysis and worldview. So in terms of further readings, and as I said, I'm giving you a basic overview of his basic philosophical assumption, his life. There are books written in English, been translated in English. You will find on Amazon and other places. Some people have written books in a very scathing and attacking Freud. Some people now have developed, psychoanalysis is the classical psychoanalysis. Now we have psychodynamic approaches where they've taken some of Freud's philosophy and they developed and adapted to current contemporary findings. So what are his philosophical assumptions? What are his philosophical assumptions? If you have any questions, actually, we'll finish one section. If you have any questions or comments, who is a Muslim will have some taqwa, but taqwa is not there, right? A person who has iman and the second level of consciousness will have taqwa, but is not there. Third is that taqwa, where a believer or Muslim is always mindful. If you want to translate taqwa like that in current language, contemporary language, that person is mindful of the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. And taqwa is, as Imam Ali described, that is that you live your life according to the teachings of the Quran and the Hadith, and you prepare for the day of judgment, and you try to avoid all those things that will harm you in this dunya. The final is ihsan, and ihsan is that you worship Allah as though you see Him. Yet if you do not see Him, know that He sees you. And very few among the human beings attain the level of ihsan. And no matter what happens to that person, right, all the difficulties and challenges that the person may have, that person is Muslim, that state, that level, nothing can harm that person. Now, as believers, as Muslims, we aspire to reach that level, but many of us will not reach that level, right? It is enough, obviously, to be a Muslim, right? But there are different consciousness, different levels. When a person, for example, right? So here, going back, going here, our Islam, we are aware of our Islam. We understand what are the dictates of Islam. We understand we are aware of what are the dictates of Iman, of Taqwa, of Ihsan, right? It's not hidden from us, right? It's not in our subconscious, it's not in our pre-consciousness or unconscious level. We are aware of this, right? Some things of our experiences, from childhood, or even yesterday, or 1 year ago, 2 years ago, yeah, that we've experienced something, right? And now we experience something similar that reminded us of what happened in the past. And so, from Islamic perspective, that the iceberg analogy is reversed, right? A lot of the stuff that we are aware, right? When a person sins, and we'll talk about sins and mental health in a few moments. When a person sins, right? When a person sins, she becomes in a state of ghafla, and more a person sins and detaches himself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more that person is submerged in the state of ghafla. The Prophet said in a hadith that when a servant sins, a dot is imprinted in his or her heart, and the person sins again, another dot, sins again, until the heart becomes dark. until the heart becomes dark. And Imam Ghazali said that when a person's heart becomes dark, in a complete state of ghafla, he sees good as bad and bad as good. Becomes sharir, he becomes evil. He sees good as bad and bad as he says good as evil and evil as good, and his life, is like that. So I didn't want to stop, but I've got so many materials to go through. Inshallah, I want to next 5 or 6. I want to go through it quickly, inshallah, and then maybe we can take a 5-10 minutes break, inshallah. So as I mentioned, that anxiety develops when, in Freud's understanding, that when the ego and the superego, right, they're in conflict, they're not able to, there's no balance. And anxiety, in Freud's understanding, is three types: the reality, the neurotic, and moral. The reality anxiety is the fear of an existential situation, right? What's happening outside. Like, for example, you see a poisonous snake, or you see a dog that is about to harm a person or harm you, right? Neurotic anxiety is the fear of being overwhelmed by one's instinct or drive, the id, as we discussed, so that one ends up doing something that will be punished, right? That's the id, neurotic. The moral anxiety is the fear of violating one's conscious or internalized parental or societal standard, like the superego, right? When the person experiences anxiety, the ego copes or responds by using defense mechanisms, right? When a person experiences anxiety, the ego, remember, the ego is the CEO, if you like, the governor, the controller, copes or responds by using defense mechanism. What are the defense mechanisms? Very, very quickly, inshallah. The ego employs defense mechanism to deal with the pain of anxiety by distorting or even denying reality, right? And Freud's in psychoanalysis, they are, they include repression, denial, displacement, sublimation, reaction formation, projection. Inshallah, we'll go through it quickly, inshallah. Repression is one of the most fundamental, important defense mechanism in Freud's understanding, right? Repression is the unconscious attempt of the ego to block out consciousness, right? And negative experiences that are too painful or threatening for a person to acknowledge. Yeah. An example of that in the slide you see, a man who has feelings of hostility and hatred towards his father, but these feelings or emotions are entirely repressed or blocked from conscious awareness because it's very difficult to acknowledge that. A person has hostile feeling towards his father. It's very difficult to acknowledge that. So these are repressed, yeah, and not and they are operates on the unconscious level. Denial, right? And the denial function in Freud understanding at a more pre-conscious or even conscious level, whereby individual refuses to accept the reality of a given situation or event that is negative, painful, or anxiety provoking. And therefore the person denies what is happening there, the reality. The person, for example, has fatal illness like cancer, right? The person will deny it, right, by not getting medical treatment. Or people who fanatics of Elvis Presley or any other people, they still deny that he is dead, right? So they go into a state of denial. Displacement. An individual copes with anxiety by shifting the discharge of his or her impulses from a threatening object or person to a much safer substitute. Yeah. So, for example, a mild-mannered man was received, strong reprimand from his supervisor, right? From his work. He comes home and kicks his dog out of frustration and anger. So it displaces that frustration and anxiety towards another object. Are you here? The dog. Or you have two people, right? So I have certain anxiety, right? What I tend, what I tend to, not me, sorry, that's not. So a person will displace the anxiety to another person, right? Like that man who kicks the dog. Sublimation is a mechanism that redirects sexual or aggressive drive into a more socially acceptable behavior, right? A person has all these sexual drives, right? But a person basically turns that into positive action. So, people who are, very intelligent, right? People, mathematicians, right? People who are painters or singers, they're very, very artistic people. They have, these skills, right? Day in, day out, they develop. But he says that, this sublimation, they have anxiety, right? What they tend to do is, right, they channel that into a more productive activity. Yeah. Reaction formation. In reaction formation, an individual expresses the opposite of the impulse that he or she is really experiencing as a defense mechanism against the objectional impulse. So, for example, people who are perhaps, as an people who are in, women particularly who are in domestic abuse relationship, right? Abusive relationship, right? The husband is abusing the wife, right? In reality, she hates her husband, right? But it ends up being extremely nice and kind to him, right? Cooking his favorite meals and giving him many compliments. So Freud viewed reaction formation as a inferior version of sublimation. Sublimation was a positive, channel that into a positive. Right here, the woman who hates her husband, right? A person who's being abused, right? Physically, emotionally, sexually, and whatnot, right? Definitely, that person has hatred towards that, right? But in this particular level or category, what person does becomes nice to the husband, cooks for him and whatnot. Projection is a defense mechanism of unconsciously attributing others one's own objectionable impulses and drive. So I have certain objectionable impulses, I have certain feelings and emotions and whatnot. What I tend to do, I project them to others. Yeah, right? I project them to others. Example would be a boy who hates his father but asserts and believes that his father hates him, right? So in a classroom, sometimes you'd have, students who say, yeah, the teacher hates me, right? In actual reality, the student has issues with the teacher. Why? Because perhaps that in his eyes, perhaps that student has unresolved issues, from his or her early childhood. Rationalization is an individual attempt to explain away painful experiences with reasons or excuses that are not accurate or true. For example, a man who does not get much anticipated and desired job promotion believes that he really did not want the promotion because he lived far away from that job. Yeah, or there'll be a lot of traveling to do. So rationalizes the feelings of anxiety of why he or she did not get that job. Regression, when the ego is threatened, an individual may use defense mechanism of regression to return to an earlier stage of development that was less stressful, but also uses less mature or less appropriate behaviors to cope with the current anxiety. Yeah. Example could be someone who's in year 7 in secondary school, who's failing academically, and then resorts to infantile or regressive behaviors such as crying for a mother and sucking her thumb. Intellectualization is a defense mechanism whereby a person detaches from a painful emotional experience by focusing only on his or her thoughts and the minute details involved in trying to analyze and explain negative emotional experiences. The mother who just, as an example, a mother who just received the news that her son passed away. He was killed by a drunken driver. Right? And she begins a long discussion of the meaning of life and death and how it is all, fated and destined and beyond her control. Instead of dealing with her feelings or shock or grief and that she has over the drunken drunken driver. Identification is a defense mechanism whereby an individual who is threatened by anxiety or other negative feeling assumes the characteristics of others who may be more successful, right? The person who's feeling low and depressed and anxious, right, looks up on idols, you know, Michael Jackson is dead, but whoever, you know, football player, for example, or singer or famous actor, and begins to idolize them, right? And identifying himself with a famous person or rock band, and you know, mimicking. And some people do that actually. Some people literally they change the whole persona, the physical persona. You know, they they spend thousands and hundreds of thousands on plastic surgery just to change their. And there's probably underlying issues there in Freud's understanding that they're trying to resolve. Now, I do want to go into the next part, Freud's understanding of the psychosexual stage, inshallah. Let's take a break. As I said, I want to slightly later, but let's take a break, inshallah. So it's 4:25 now, 4:25. Before we do go on a break, inshallah, if there are any, what are your questions or comments? And then I'll give you a time, inshallah, to come back. It doesn't mean you stop. You can leave your laptop on, just unmute yourself, inshallah. So any questions or comments so far? I know the last section I went a bit quickly, but I wanted to cover the main aspects, inshallah. So any comments, questions that you have, brothers and sisters? You can unmute yourself and talk, inshallah. You will be getting the copy of the slides, inshallah. You'll be getting the copy of the slides. And you should have, everyone should have access to the web page on the Mawarid website, where you can download the PDF document, which has a lot of the information there. Yeah. So just to summarize, you know, look, we looked at Freud's you know, biography. Now look, he had very distasteful. So does anyone want to talk?
Assalamu alaikum. I would just, you know, it was interesting when you talked about the consciousness and the unconsciousness. So basically, when it comes to practically sitting in front of people, we see a completely different picture, because although, yes, it would be the Muslim, we should be more conscious. However, 90%, I would say, or more, in practical sense, operating in unconscious way, you know. So we actually don't, you know, although obviously Islamically it would be wonderful if we were more conscious what we are doing and saying and being, how we behave, how we talk, how we, you know, live our life. So that's something doesn't happen in reality.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a really important point. Now, I was, you know, although the I speak analogy, it was just an analogy, right? So what I'm saying that everyone is people. For example, right? What Freud's saying, look, for example, someone from Islamic perspective, yeah, in a basic level, someone does not pray, for example, yeah, from Islamic perspective, or someone, I don't know, is rude towards someone or whatever, right? Or sins, yeah. We'll come to that in detail, yeah. What Freud would say, oh, these are the reason why, because there are unresolved issues in childhood, which is in your we have to basically look into your unconsciousness and look at get insight and look at what happened in the early childhood, and that's the only way we can understand. You can develop. But I'm saying that Islam is not like that. There is some there. We'll come to it, inshallah. Yeah. But it doesn't. We don't operate right on the unconscious level. In your therapy, we may think that, and I'm challenging the status quo understanding. Yeah, so it's fine. You know, you don't have to agree with me or not, right? I'm saying I'm challenging the status quo, right? Because when I do something, I am fully aware of why I'm doing it, right? Because Freud understanding is that, you know, we have all this sexual drive. We'll discuss the sexual development, the different stages, and these are submerged, and And reason why we have problems in our adult life is because there's some issues that took place in our childhood life and they were unresolved. And now the reason I'm not praying or the reason I'm not doing this is very deterministic. Yeah, it's not taking responsibility.
Sometimes what I wanted to say is that our nature as a human being is same, whether it's you're a Freud, Freud way of thinking or Muslim, our human nature is actually one nature, right? And so therefore we will have the similarity in our
Not necessarily.
no, not the, okay, we can look at it from a different religious point of view, but what I'm saying to you, as a human being, we have similar nature, as essentially similar nature, but how we train ourselves, what we learn from our environment, what we learn from our deen is totally different. Yes, but the nature, we cannot discard the nature.
Yeah, no, but that's the thing.
Because we still have sex, we have food.
But when we say, now, that's a good point, and inshallah tomorrow we will discuss that more.
Okay.
From the Islamic perspective. Yeah. Now, and look at later on, look at, a lot of experts, and they don't really take a lot of the assumptions made by Freud, right?
Yes, no, even the Freudian,
on that point, on that point, sorry, on that point. Now, one people who criticize Freud, I'm not talking about Muslims, by the way. I'm not talking about Muslims. People non-Muslim who trained in Freud's psychoanalysis, right? They even say, a lot of them even say that, one of the main criticism is that, okay, when you say like we're all the same human nature, well, not really, because what Freud said, if you look at some of the studies that have been done even now, look at it's not universal. So if you look at the Muslim cultures, right, the Muslim societies, or we Eastern society, the way they view things, their outlook and worldview, the way they look at personality and the human nature is very different from the way Freud looked at human nature.
Yeah, that's why a lot of cultural angle. This is a cultural angle we're talking about. But what I'm talking about,
I'm not talking about just a cultural angle.
Yeah, no, I'm saying the basic need of human nature. For example, we need food, we have
that's not what I'm. But that's not what I'm talking about here. See, that very good, very good. That's not what Freud is talking about here necessarily. Yeah, I'm not talking about that aspect.
Right, he's talking about
human needs. Islam talks about human needs. All civilization talks about human needs. That's not what I'm talking about from Freud's perspective, right? We need food. Yeah, we need sexual gratification. Yeah, we need compassion. We need this. We need that. Right now. That's not what I'm talking about. That's all the same for everyone.
That's what they bring you to the room, the therapy room. You see, it's their shahwa, it's their desires, it's what makes them.
But that's not what I'm talking about here. Yeah, these are psychological needs. Yeah, Maslow talked about the pyramid. Yeah, these needs are universal. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. What Freud essentially is saying, and I'm not hopefully essentializing what he's saying, but this is what non-Muslims saying, right? Is that because the reason why people are, have messed up lives in a way, people have turbulence and conflicts in adult lives because of the way they were brought. That's going to be more clear when we look at the psychosexual stages from a Freud understanding. Yeah, because we went through the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, and whatnot, right? And because we had certain issues there, adult life, we have problems because of that. I think that's his philosophy on human nature, yeah, and that's completely antithetical to even what B.F. Skinner said and what Carl Rogers said and others, and it's completely antithetical to the Islamic perspective. That's what I'm talking about.
Definitely. This one, look, this as a psychodynamic analyst, right?
Where you're coming from is a different perspective to that.
Yeah. What I'm saying to you is actually a lot of us do not use those things any longer. Actually, a lot of, like you said, a lot of us do not actually dwell in all those kind of things because actually in the room we deal with what's.
But I will go into it. I mean, on my understanding from what I've seen is that even most people now, you'll find in the world, in the Western world, as few people who practice psychoanalysis, the classical psychoanalysis. Yeah. Now that's developed in the contemporary psychodynamic approach. Yeah. However, it's important for us to understand that. I'm not sure if you were there from the beginning. We talked about this, understanding the philosophy of Freud. Yeah. I would contend. Yeah. You don't have to. I would contend that even counselors, Muslim counselors, subconsciously, right, or indirectly, they do have these philosophical assumptions in mind, although they may not have learned it, right? So, for example, the model, the approach of therapy that they take, whether on a basic level, whether it's direct or indirect, yeah, so is based on the model of psychotherapy Freud espoused, and inshallah that will become clear. Yeah. So let's if there are different questions, there are no different questions. Let's take, it's 4:36. So we take 5 minutes break, inshallah. So you don't have to turn your laptop off. Let's take 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. Toilet break or bathroom break, inshallah. If you want to get a drink or coffee or whatever, inshallah. Now it's all you have to do is mute yourself and leave everything on, inshallah. So it's 4:36. Shall we come back 4:50? Is that okay, everyone, inshallah? We'll come back 4:50, inshallah, resume that, 4:50. So until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, welcome back. I have my timer 4:50 now, inshallah. So we'll resume the discussion. We still have lots to cover for today, inshallah. We'll have another discussion at the end before we finish, inshallah. Just to remind everyone and those people who have joined or could not join in the beginning, is that we are covering some of the basic understanding and going through some Islamic understanding from what I understand briefly, because we can't, each section's unique at a long time. Tomorrow, inshallah, I'm going to go into the Islamic framework and go into some examples, and we can discuss those examples, how perhaps would a conventional counselor would deal with it, and how an Islamic counselor, Muslim counselor, would or should deal with it, inshallah. Can't hear anything. Can you, I don't know, can you hear me now? I have unmuted myself. Can everyone hear me, or still you can't hear me? Okay, good. You can hear, inshallah. So, as I said, I do want to kind of challenge. I'm not saying I have all the knowledge and I know everything, and I'm saying what I've studied, or I know from the Islamic tradition, and what I've studied from the conventional tradition, is that this course is hopefully an introductory course, but hopefully will challenge you. Yeah, that's the whole point. If you're not challenged, if I'm not challenged, if you're not challenged, then what would be the point of the course? If you know everything already, then what's the point you attending this course? Yeah, apart from as a reminder. So the course is, although it's an introductory course, is there to, inshallah, challenge some of the concepts that are out there, the status quo, and from what I understand, at least, inshallah. And inshallah, at the end or tomorrow, we'll go through, okay, what's beyond this course. And there are some ideas that I would like to share with you. And if you want to, inshallah, take that journey, we can do that, inshallah. So let's continue. Let's share the screen again. Bismillah. So we talked about the defense mechanisms. Freud, he developed his psychoanalysis, and and he said, we all go through certain psychosexual stages. Yeah. So the oral phase, the anal phase, the phallic phase, the latent phase, and the genital phase. The oral phase represents the mouth, the suckling, the swallowing, the eating, the child, the baby, eating from the breast of the mother. The anal, the anus, withholding or expelling feces, represents tidiness and an untidiness. The phallic stage represents the penis, the clitoris, sex and masturbation. And I'm using those terms, we are learning. So this is how Freud understood it. And from the Islamic perspective, and it's, although many counselors and psychologists will not use or employ that framework, underlying people still do use it. They may not use the same terminologies. And I think, and from Islamic perspective, as far as I understand, is very problematic. We're sexualizing everyone. Everything is about these sexual drives. Yeah. And if, for example, if my mother, or if a person's mother did not breastfeed, or gave too much attention, and that person becomes, a person who is an attention seeker, for example. Yeah. Or did not receive enough, or oral treatment, if you like, then that person will have, unresolved issues in adult life. Yeah. Of being needy and wanting. That's what I mean. It's very deterministic, which is, from the Islamic perspective, is very, very problematic. Although people are not, as counselors, many counselors will not see this, but underlying the counseling process, right? And the therapy sessions, we do this. People do that, even though they not acknowledge the language here. So let's go into it very, very briefly, inshallah. Yeah, Freud and sex, not seen, but they were these names or labels are used interchangeably, right? And when he, remember, this is context. At the beginning, we talked about it. When he talked about this, people were shocked, people were astonished. Remember, he came from a Victorian era. At that time, Queen Victoria came into power, and she was on the moral crusade, if you like. She wanted to, free slaves, and they did free slaves, and they wanted America and other countries, free slaves, because this was the Enlightenment period, right? So when he talked about, and people were conservative, especially sexually, they were conservative in the sense that, people were, women, for example, and men, they were hijab. But if you look at some of the videos on social media now, right, a lot of in England, of the towns and cities, you see men and women, in particular women, wearing, hijabs, right? So they were socially conservative back then, right? People did not talk about sex openly. They didn't talk about relationships openly like people do now. People go on Facebook and they talk about their sex. People make videos about their own private life. When he came, he talked about psychosexual development, right, and talked about sex in a candid and direct manner. People were shocked, right? People didn't obviously agree to what he said, but now it seems that everything is about sex. Yeah, sexualize every single advertisement, selling books, selling this, selling that. It's all it's all about sex. I'm not saying this is the way it should be. In this episode, I'm saying this is how it is. Yeah. Oral phase, and this is the earliest phase, the first of the phases, earliest phase of the psychosexual development, and it extends from birth to approximately 18 months in Freud's understanding. The gratification of libido centered around feeding, and the organs that are associated, as I said, is mouth, lips, tongue, and this is achieved through suckling, biting, and the oral contact. Sorry. Anal phase, the main source of pleasure and libido gratification come from the activities surrounding the retaining and passing of feces. Yeah. And this phase is second and third years of life, according to Freud. And he, psychoanalysis says that this is significant for the child's later development, because the response to paternal demands or bowel control may have far-reaching effects on personality development. Yeah. Phallic stage, the third stage of psychosexual development, sexual gratification occurs through direct experience with the genitals. Phallic stage occurs when between the age of 3 and 7 years, and we'll discuss the Oedipus and Electra complex in a moment. But the penis becomes a principal object of interest, and you know, the other one, the latency period, a period of sexual development between the age of 4 to 5 and the beginning of, you know, adolescence, separating infantile from normal sexuality. During this time, memories and wishes remaining from the earlier infantile period are repressed. The latency period is marked by the absence of any great sexual development. Now, what is the Oedipus-Oedipal complex? And this is taken from Greek mythology, right? He said that Oedipus, right? He falls in love with his mother and kills his rival, i.e., his father. Right? This mythological creature or being falls in love with his mother, right? And he can't control it, and he becomes jealous and envious and kills his father. And this Oedipal stage is 3 to 5 years of age. A boy continues to be very attached to his mother and develops a wish to supplant his father in the mother's affection, get rid of his father. Yeah, I remember we mentioned at the beginning, Freud talked about himself that he developed romantic feelings, in a way, sexual feeling towards his mother, right? He developed his hostile feeling towards his father. He couldn't do anything about it, obviously, right? And because, you know, so he, from his own experience, he developed this understanding of the psychosexual stages. So he, fearing a retribution from his father, right, causes him to repress these, you know, feelings of romanticism and sexual feeling towards their mother. And when the boy, the Oedipus complex is referring to the male, right? The Electra complex refers to the female, right? When the boy gives up, right, gives up the mother, right, and forms other relationships, right, with her, you know, and with the father, their brothers, husbands, and whatnot, the Oedipal phase is resolved, right? The Electra complex, right? The female, the Electra complex is a female equivalent to the Oedipus complex, and many people don't know about this. It's rarely used in contemporary psychoanalysis, right? The female child has an erotic attraction to her father, yeah, and she is hostile. It's the reverse, right? She is hostile towards their mother, yeah. Although the resolution of the conflict is different for male and female children. So in the Oedipus complex is the boy, you know, having sexual feeling towards the mother, trying to get rid of the father, because you know these tensions and the anxiety that the boy has, and he can't do anything about it because the father suppresses the anxiety. Yeah, and the Electra complex is that, you know, essentially, like, you know, said, you know, the female, they don't have a penis, yeah, and they try to, you know, the affection and attraction is geared or channeled towards their towards the father, and the hatred and the hostility geared towards the complete opposite to the Oedipus complex. Now, let's take a moment and understand, from the Islamic perspective, and from a scientific perspective, you can't really prove that. Even contemporary psychologists, and they throw this out the window, right? We'll come to, there are some issues some things we can learn from, right? But this way I described it, and way Freud described it, and the psychoanalysis school described it, is completely antithetical to the way we understand our relationship with our family, right? A relationship with our father. And it's not universal. Now, people who come from the Muslim background or the Asian background, the Eastern background, as an example, right? Or hypothetically speaking, or as an example, right? Freud focused his understanding on the family nucleus, having a mother and the father and the siblings and whatnot. What about those people who are single parent? Yeah. What about those people, mothers who bring up their children, or the father bring up their children, or people who are, who are homosexuals? But you can't see, it's not universal. You can't apply that. I'm not giving an Islamic understanding. I'm just giving you from a conventional secular perspective, even that you can't, like, it's very Eurocentric, a very, Austrian, perspective, right? And as I said, from the Muslim perspective, it's not like, now, I'm talking about from the Islamic perspective. Muslim might, because of the culturalization, because of secularization, right, of Western concept in our psyche, we may approach it in a similar manner. From the Islamic perspective, we know how a family structure should be or is, right? And can we really say that the conflicts, anxiety, I got fired from my job, or a student is worrying about the exam, yeah, develops anxiety and whatnot, is due to because of the sexual anxiety that developed in an early age? I know I'm simplifying it. Essentially, this is what it is. I would say that resounding no. Yeah. And many, when these understanding went to the Muslim countries, many people embraced it, unfortunately, right? But many people, like, for example, people like Professor Malik Badr, one of the pioneers of Islamic psychology, if you like, right? In the 70s and the 80s, he wrote, books and writings on Freud and conventional psychology, and he completely refuted that from the Islamic perspective. Yeah, and not only from the Islamic perspective, but as I said, people who are non-Muslims, experts, psychologists, they reject these notions. Doesn't mean they completely reject Freud, and he has certain overarching principles that we apply and we can take benefit from, and inshallah we'll see that later on, and most importantly tomorrow, right? But the fundamental issues we can't accept, yeah, because they're antithetical to the Islamic principle. Now you can say, okay, well, we in our therapy sessions we don't really apply that, but beneath our sessions, the way a lot of Muslim counselors, right, they operate, there are some elements there which are, in my opinion, which can be problematic, and which perhaps from the Islamic perspective needs to be developed in my understanding. Yeah? So model of health. Yeah, what is our understanding of the model of health? Very, very briefly. In psychoanalysis, healthy individuals have enough conscious awareness of the wish-fulfilling aims to have self-control and self-awareness. Yeah, to a meaning, a person who has a healthy mindset or healthy cycle is able to, is conscious, right? Some of the aspects that are unconscious have been made conscious, right? Important personality structures have been reconstructed, and the neurosis and neurotic processes have been undone. Yeah, and whereby a person is matured, person is developed, right? So there's an equilibrium. A person is living in a healthy way, in a balanced way. Person is able to live a wholesome life. Now, this is a continuous process. Even contemporary psychoanalysis mentioned that it's a continuous process, right? It's not something static that in one part of our life we develop and that is it. No, it's a continuous process. Model of abnormality. Now, this is where, you know, Freud, he believed that everyone, yeah, is pathological. Yeah, some more than others. Yeah, due to the inevitable conflicts and fixation that develop in our formative years, right? So everyone is pathological. You know, everyone has issues. Everyone is messed up because of, as I mentioned, what happened in the early formative years. Yeah, and this is, you know, as I said, this is problematic, not just from the Islamic perspective, but from a conventional perspective. You can't, it's not universal, right? You can't apply that principle, apply that understanding of human nature, human personality to everyone, or to every culture, every religion, or every society, or every age. So we are products of our context, right? Are we, from the Islamic perspective, are we saying that the Sahabas were like that? Or the prophets were like that? No way. So this is antithetical to the Islamic understanding. Specific symptoms that develop reflect both the psychosexual stage in which the conflicts and fixation first develop, and the particular manner in which immature or primitive ego defense mechanisms are utilized to deal with the resulting anxiety. In short, stress stirs up unacceptable wishes and makes the person anxious, creates intrapsychic or internal conflicts and tensions and problems. The anxiety is avoided at all costs. As an example, the child, the boy develops romantic feeling towards their mother. That, you know, it becomes anxious, develops hostile feeling towards their father, right? But the, you know, acting out there is avoided, right? Is avoided, and the anxiety is avoided, is suppressed, repressed, right? And the vicious cycle of is established, right? A more direct strategy of resolving the conflict itself is not adopted because the deeper unconscious primary process is non-logical, irrational, and temporal, makes no differentiation with respect to time. We're going to be discussing, inshallah, about sin and ma'asi and model of abnormality from the Islamic perspective. But from this particular understanding, we know, you know, we don't need to be a scholar from the Islamic perspective, right, to understand that this is completely antithetical. When I say, you know, completely, but more or less antithetical to the Islamic way of approaching human personality, or how we have developed as human beings, right? It doesn't mean that our childhood or our culture, our society does not impact us. I say it does, right? But we'll come to a conclusion, from what I understand, how we approach that from the Islamic perspective. Model of psychotherapy, right? From Freud's understanding. So there are certain techniques that analysts employ in their therapy, right? Number one, they have to maintain an analytical framework, right? Be neutral, right? And anonymous as much as possible, right? You don't give much or any self-disclosure. Scheduling a therapy and starting on time, finishing on time, being regular, right? It can take a long period by being regular, being consistent, and being consistent in these ways is the most fundamental part of the therapeutic framework from a psychoanalysis perspective. Number two, free association, right? And is a bedrock of foundation of psychoanalysis, it involves encouraging the client to say whatever comes to mind, and a lot of the times the psychoanalysis, the patient, you see in some movies or dramas, whatever, the therapist sits on a couch, facing away, and the client is facing away the therapist, right? And the client is not looking at the therapist, and the therapist is not looking at the client. Away, both of them are not facing each other. So in that perspective, the analyst encourages the client to, say whatever comes to his or her mind, right? Without any evaluation, without any reprimand or censorship, right? And this way, and you're going back to the unconscious, right? And the reason he does that, or analysts will do that, is because they want to resurface, or they want to get the unconscious issues into consciousness, right? To get understanding, get insight, get insight, right? Dream analysis. Freud considered dreams analysis the royal road to unconscious. So dreams, and he divided dream into two: the hidden and the non-hidden, right? The non-hidden is very, very easy to understand, right? But in the therapy session, we'll look at the hidden, underlying issues, right? What does the dream mean, right? Right. The analyst will discuss and interpret the client's dreams, yeah, and free association of to the dreams, or parts of them that can be viewed, and that's the hidden or the unhidden, if you like. The third, interpretation, yeah, the technique whereby the analyst clarifies and explains to the client the meanings of certain unconscious materials emerging in the client's dreams, free association, experiencing the therapeutic relationship between the analyst and the clients, the resistance, the blockages, even transference and transference. Analysis or transference occurs when the client unconsciously relates to the analyst as if he or she were a parental figure, right? The analyst allows the transference to develop and then interprets meaning to the client. Yeah. Why the client has developed this attachment, if you like, in other words, to the analyst. But the analyst, in Freud's understanding, needs to be also careful of his or her own unconscious responses to the client. Yeah, it's called counter transference. Analysis of resistance. Resistance is a basic psychoanalytic concept that refers to a client's blocking or defending against bringing unconscious or repressed material into conscious awareness. Yeah, and that can manifest in a number of different ways. Yeah, a client can be consistently late for the sessions, right? Not producing much way of free associations, represses the feelings, and talking about things that are not really that important, superficial stuff like sports and general stuff, but not looking at the issues that that person is facing. Yeah, not giving a lot of free associations. Let's look at they're the fundamental interventions, techniques from a psychoanalytic perspective. And this is a basic script of a psychoanalytic therapy session. So I'm just going to read it out, and hopefully in class I would obviously get someone to if you like read it with me, but perhaps someone can actually volunteer to do that. So as I need a client can read out, inshallah, and I'll be the analyst, inshallah. Someone want to volunteer?
I'm happy to read.
You want to remind your name, sister?
It's Sephora.
Sephora. Okay. So by the way, this is a very basic understanding, a basic script of a therapy session, right? Which really outlines one or two fundamental intervention techniques of the psychoanalysis. So you want to start, sister?
Yep. So, client, I'm feeling anxious again today, like I usually feel, and for no good reason too. I don't have anything pressing or stressful to do today, and yet I'm having this dreadful anxiety almost all the time. Analyst does not say anything and remains quiet. Client,
No, you don't have to read that.
Oh, sorry. What did you want me to just read the client bits?
Yeah. So I'll be the analyst and read out what the analyst says, or not say.
Sure. Okay. It's really hard for me to deal with these horrible anxious feelings when I don't know why or where they're coming from. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to explode or die of a heart attack or something horrible because of these intense feelings of anxiety and fear.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my anxiety may be a bit worse today, especially as I was thinking of coming here for my session with you and wondering what else will come up in our session together.
What comes to mind?
Well, I know that you've asked me to keep a record of my dreams and to talk about my dreams openly here with you. And I did have a horrible dream, almost like a nightmare, just last night. And I'm feeling really anxious already just bringing it up.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should tell you about this dream or nightmare. Well, I had a scary dream last night that I was all alone in this big, huge house, and suddenly it caught on fire. And I was inside the house all by myself and panicking, seeing the fire and smelling the thick smoke. And I tried to get out by trying to find a door or an exit, but I kept on running in circles with the fire coming closer to me, and I couldn't find an exit. I really felt overwhelming anxiety and fear, and was so sure that the flames would engulf me and I would quickly be burned to death, up in smoke for sure. But then I woke up trembling in sweat.
And here the analyst would go into it a little more interpretation and whatnot. So what comes to mind now? What other feelings, thoughts, or experiences? So it's a very basic. Thank you for that, Sister Safura. Is that yeah?
Yeah, that's fine.
Jazakallah khair. So very basic. And the reason why I wanted to, I mean, I'm sure the counselors here would know this. Well, hopefully, when I give examples of the Islamic perspective, you will see the difference between this approach and that approach. Obviously, you know, even now there are different approaches in the psychodynamic, in the counseling fields. Generally, it's non-directive, and that, you know, the humanistic approach is more non-directive. Psychodynamic approach is non-directive, right? So it's a basic example. It doesn't go into it too much. Really highlights, you know, the use of free association and dream analysis. And you can see that the analyst is not saying anything really, apart from what comes to mind, right? Remaining silent. So throughout the session, you know, that's the approach that the analyst will take. Yeah. So let's begin, inshallah. It's 5:20. Let's begin a faith-based analysis of what we discussed. I know I looked at in some aspects from what I understand from the Islamic perspective, but I want to go into a bit more now today, and then go into it tomorrow in more detail, inshallah. Now, I know this is a lot of it is academic. I try to use examples, and tomorrow you'll see we'll have examples, the case studies. And there are some case studies that I looked at in some classes with other students that I've had, and also I'll also look at case studies that I have dealt with and I'm dealing with at the moment, inshallah. So it can be academic, and I'm sure some of the brothers and sisters who've not kind of researched or first time they learning about this, it may be boring to them, but inshallah, you know, if you learn, if you take the slides and you read other books, a lot of things will become more clear. Yeah. So first thing is philosophical assumptions. So we discussed what are the philosophical assumptions of Freud. So let's look at Freud on religion, right? He was, as I said, he was an atheist. He didn't believe, or agnostic, if you like. He didn't believe in religion. He hated religion. He wrote really harshly against Christianity. That was the time, at the time he grew up. I mean, he obviously at the later on in his life, he moved to England because of the war, and he lived in England for about a year or a year and a half, I believe. So he was exposed. I mean, even in Austria, exposed to Christianity. So he regarded Christianity as, in a really vile way, right? He didn't like religion itself, in particular Christianity. And he says, and not just him, and a lot of atheists, and they say that people who believe in God, essentially, people who believe in God and they deify an object to worship, right? It's because of of the worries and the concerns that they have of life and death, especially in the early days. Science was not developed, medicine was not developed, society was not developed, right? People who they would go to the priest and they go to religious figures to make sense of things, right? To make sense of things. So because they could not answer, the atheists, because human beings could not answer from a scientific perspective a lot of questions, they developed the understanding of religion and God. Yeah. So Freud had similar or same understanding of religion, right? And he treated religion as a wish fulfilling illusion, right? Genuine religious motivation and the spiritual life are ignored or treated, in a very negative way, not just in a psychoanalytic perspective, but generally the humanistic trend, in the psychodynamic trend, right? Although this is changing now in our current context. Freud's argument, to come back to Freud, is that religious believer or believers in adolescence or adulthood come face to face with a cold, ambiguous, or threatening universe in which annihilation, isolation, or meaninglessness are seen as likely options, and death is the inevitable outcome. Yeah? And he says that this creates anxiety, problems, conflict within us, and in a primitive, self-protective gesture, right? He said we create a comforting illusion for us of religion, or the understanding or the concept of God to shield us, right? And the illusion, he argues, we embrace stems from a real distorted memories of our childhood years. So he say essentially what he's saying, that because people believe in religion now in the adult, because children they don't know how to differentiate. They don't know, right? They have not learned about religion. Right? In adulthood, we form understanding of religion because, again, going back to what happened in our childhood life, right? And he says, in a desperate attempt to maintain a sense of security and peace and comfort and well-being, and to meet our adult needs and wants, we embrace some form of religion, yeah, an imaginary deity, a divine father figure. He says, a divine father figure, right? And he said, and I quote, the gods people believe in must exorcise the terrors of nature. They must reconcile men to cruelty of fate, and they must compensate them for the suffering which a civilized life in common has imposed upon them. The illusions we create are for ourselves and can also serve as a symbolic means to meet unfulfilled childhood longings as well. Religion is seen as a kind of universal neurosis that civilization substitutes for a more authentic personal reality based on scientific, objective knowledge. Yeah, so he explains atheism essentially, right? Because of unresolved conflict. In adulthood, we have unresolved conflicts with our fathers, our mothers, our childhood, and we create this father, heavenly figure to to shield us from those issues. Yeah? And as I said at the beginning, the writers have said it's probably because, right, of his own unresolved issues. If you want to use Freud's understanding, it's because of his own unresolved issue, probably because, as some writers said, that he had a nanny who was a devout Catholic Christian. She passed away. And probably because of that, his perspective of religion and worldview is influenced by his tumultuous upbringing and his experiences that he had with his, or the death of his nanny. And it's a lot of experts, right? They said that his ambivalence, so his, I can use the word hatred if you like, right, is due to the issues that he had from his, to use Freud's methodology, his unresolved issues. So at the very deeper level, right, you know, his understanding of God or his relationship with God, right, is on a more personal level, unconscious level. The problem is with that, you know, you can both explain, as experts have said, you can, psychoanalysis can explain both religion and atheism. Can explain both religion and atheism. It's very wide. And so it's not just a theory, it becomes a dogma. Yeah. Right. So psychoanalysis, right, is not just a theory. A theory you can prove or disprove. Right. There has to be some element of, you know, where you can disprove it. Whereas dogma, right, as religion, for example, Islam, it's dogmatic, but it's also flexible. Right. There's certain things, right, we have to believe. We have to believe in certain dogmas. Right. Whereas, you know, Freud, the way he approached his understanding psychoanalysis, and he even said that counselors or analysts or therapists are pastoral workers. He used those terminology. Even Carl Rogers used the pastoral workers. Right? They're the secular priest. That's the word he used. The secular priest. Right. So he was not he was not just talking about, you know, psychoanalysis or psychology from a clinical perspective. He gave a worldview. Right. He gave dogma. He gave theology. His understanding of dogma. His understanding of theology. He gave a worldview, a personality structure, behavior, how human beings should behave, right? Why do they do what they do, right? He was not just a theory; he was a religion, right? Freud's religion, right? And that is why many of the experts have said, like, because it's so that you can both prove atheism from that perspective and disprove atheism. It's very, very elastic, right? When it comes to religion, yes, there are certain things which are always going to change, but there's certain things that will not change. The reality with a capital T, truth does not change. Other realities which are context-based can change. Yeah? So does that mean here now that analysis, psychodynamic approaches and people who teach that they're anti-God? Not necessarily, right? But they're not coming from a God-centered perspective. We'll come to that, inshallah, in a few moments. Model of personality. So I think you probably have some questions. So let's Electra complex, electric penis, envy, yes. Do more modern non-Muslim psychological thinkers challenge Freud's philosophies, how he utilizes breastfeeding when in actual fact it's a completely natural function and appropriate relation. Yeah, as I said, there are on the slides on the document, you'll see some references that you can read up on, inshallah. No, I'm talking about first half is almost 99% of what I said. It's not from the Islamic perspective necessarily, right? It's from what others have said, non-Muslims, what other psychologists have said, right? Even B.F. Skinner disagreed with Freud. Carl Rogers disagreed with Freud, right? Jung, right? Adler, who were, as I said at the beginning, who were prodigies or who were colleagues of, better word to use, colleagues of Freud, they disagree with him. Right? Even early on, people disagreed. And Jung and Rogers, B.F. Skinner, they're dons, they're pioneers of conventional humanistic psychology. Early on, they disagreed, yeah, because they said that Freud is very deterministic in his approach. Later on, obviously, people have written books on it and they disagreed and they looked at the issues that Freud has. But also from the Muslim perspective, one of the major players, I would say, in contemporary times, is in the English language, Professor Malik Badri. In the Arabic language is Professor Najati. He's written a number of different books on the Islamic perspective, on the Hadith and the Quran and the psychological perspective. And there are others, but those are the two main players from the Islamic perspective. So let's go back to our slide, inshallah. Okay, model of personality. Very, very quickly, inshallah. You know how much I want to leave some time for discussions. So as I said, there is some relevance from the Islamic perspective, right? Broadly speaking, of the themes that Freud introduced. Yeah, you know, for example, a famous hadith that we all know, right? كل مولود يولد على الفطرة. We can't go into what fitra means, but every unborn child is born on a natural disposition. Now, there are different opinions among the scholars what fitra actually means. Yeah? There are three main opinions of the classical and contemporary scholars, right? But let's say, for the sake of argument, that everyone is born on a natural disposition to know God, referring to the Allah's covenant, that before we were born, before we were placed on this dunya, that God gathered everyone on a plane, and he said, "Am I not your Lord?" And everyone said, believers and non-believers in this dunya, everyone said, "Bala, shahidna." Yes, we have witnessed that you are our Lord. Right? So some scholars said that this refers to the natural disposition to know God. Right? The human being were created this inclination. Right? Wherever we are placed, we want to recognize God. We want to know God. We want to love God. We want to have this attachment and relationship with God. And then the Prophet said that, however, you know, the parents, the society, they make him or her into a Jew or Christian or whatever. So Freud was right in that sense that, you know, our culture, our society, our upbringing does have some impact. But that hadith, we cannot literally apply it, in my opinion, apply that conception of, you know, understanding in what Freud said in relation to what we discussed about his psychosexual relationship. Why? Why? You know, you have a number of people. You have a believer, you have a person who believes in Islam or believes in Christianity and lives a life fulfilling God's commandments. Another person who goes through difficulties and challenges, right? The person A will not be, in my opinion, and looking at my own life, right, difficult challenges, I cannot say that the difficulties that I may have faced, the anxiety I may face now, it goes back to what my father did or did not do, mother did not do. So I had a normal upbringing. There was no issues with this affection. Yeah, there's affection for the mother, but not the way that Freud discussed. There was no hostility towards the father, right? The father was there. Many of my clients will say that there was no issue. Now, am I going to say that it's all down to that? But it doesn't mean that, you know, if a child grew up in a family setting, abusive family setting, where the father is, you know, abusive towards the mother, for example, right, where, you know, the father is shouting at the children, that will have a major impact. His psychology, his upbringing. But do we dwell on that? Now, do we define that person from the Islamic perspective? Do we define that person because of what happened in the past? Right? No, we don't. From the Islamic perspective, we don't. Right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as an example, Sahabas. First of all, he went through difficulties in his life. Yeah. His mother passed away. His parents passed away when he was young. He was given away to a nanny who looked after him. When he grew up, his family, his uncles, Abu Lahab and others, they wanted to kill him. They wanted to assassinate him, right? So in early life, he went through difficulties and challenges. These challenges and difficulties did not define him, right? Many people, many of my clients, Muslims, I know, they want, look at people in Syria, for example, in Palestine, other countries. They go through difficulties and challenges, but are they defined by that? right? Bombs are being bombs are being thrown every night, but are they, you know, is their personality the same as our personality, right? Do they suffer from the same anxiety and depression that people in our society suffer from, right? People who have, for example, everything that they want, yeah, they still suffer from depression and anxiety. They're not resilient. But from the Islamic perspective, from the Muslim perspective, even now, right? You know, if the way people approach things, the way people approach mental health, mental illness is very, very different. What psychoanalytical framework does, even other conventional psychotherapies, is that they allow, you know, yes, you tackle those issues, what happened, yeah, but you don't dwell upon it. What I feel that's like, you know, and what not me, but experts have said, non-Muslim experts have said, is that, you know, psychoanalysis, the therapy sessions are so long, right? So long, and it is very, very non-directive, right? It allows the client to dwell and dwell and dwell and dwell. And sometimes, well, from the exam perspective, what happens, right? If we look at free association, right? Islam says, for example, as an example, like if I have a bad thought about another person, yeah, right? Now, what do? Do I dwell upon that, right? Well, I go out, I don't know the person, yeah? But I had this perception about this person, I have a bad thought. What does Islam say, right? I say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, right? I have husnul dhan for that person, I've husnul dhan for my parents, I've husnul dhan for my brothers, I've husnul dhan for my sisters, right? So from the root, we eradicate that. But I'm giving a basic example, right? Free association, right? I'm not saying in a Islamic therapy session we don't allow the client to talk. I'm not saying that, but you have to determine, you know, the limits. You have to determine the limits, because the shaitan, because the Freud did not understand that there is shaitan. Freud did not believe in the supernatural. Freud did not believe in the jinns. Freud did not believe that the, you know, alladhi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas. He didn't believe in all that, but we believe in that. So if I allow my thoughts, what my thoughts are thoughts, yeah. But if there are negative thoughts, and if I allow those negative thoughts to surface, right, and I go to a client, right, it's very complex. I'm giving a very basic understanding. It's very complex, right? But sometimes you do. I'm not saying you do need to allow the client to talk. From the exam perspective, I'm not saying you don't, yeah, but there has to be certain limits, yeah. And from the exam perspective, we have to know that, you know, there are certain things, you know, we don't need to say. Yeah, there are certain thoughts that come perhaps from the satanic thoughts. Yeah, we don't need to say. What that will do in some cases, that will drive, because when the analyst interprets, right, that will take the client to another direction. So, and as they may say, no, I'm not involved, but in actual reality, you are involved, right? So even psychodynamic and humanistic and other approaches, they say, we're not involved. We're allowing the client to explore, but you are actually involved indirectly. When you interpret, for example, right, you are guiding the client. From the exam perspective, is more direct. So the psychoanalytical perspective is very, very, very indirect, is very long-ended, right? And it takes probably years. And sometimes some of the experts, they say that it actually does not resolve the actual issues. From the faith perspective, Islam perspective is more direct. Direct does not mean, right, that the analyst does not allow the client to explore the feelings and emotions. Model of health. Freud notions of health stresses individualism over and against interdependence. And this is really, really important for us to understand. So you're looking inwards, yeah, the intra-psychic way of approaching things, yeah. You know, and this is really, really concerning, right? Because the Islamic tradition, the understanding is that, right, there is a deep emphasis on our dependence on God, yeah, and our need or necessity to develop a healthy and meaningful, significant relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with others. And tomorrow we're going to go into that, the Islamic, the model, yeah. And what this does, in my observation, understanding, is that you look at inward, right? You're looking for the answers inside, and this has potential of a person to become narcissistic and also self-worship. Yeah, and Freud, his notion of the matter of health and well-being, right? He would argue that, right, there is no such a thing as authentic love for anyone or God, right? We don't, as human beings, we do things because we are selfish. We want things in return. Yeah. Everything, every good that we do for others, there is an ulterior motive. So there is no authentic love for God. There is no authentic love for others. Now I want to have a quick discussion on now, how does that relate to the Islamic framework, or what we understand from Islam. Why do we pray? Yeah. Do we pray, for example? Do we not do good? Do we do good because we want to earn God's love or earn Jannah, and want to avoid punishment? Yeah. So in classical psychology, they talked about the intrinsic and extra, the inward and the outward. So I want to have a quick discussion on that, inshallah. So what do you think? Do you agree with Freud, or you don't? And what is your understanding from the Islamic perspective on that? Psychoanalysis and Woody Allen, example of use of therapy. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. What do you mean? Do you agree with Freud?
So in Freud's understanding is that as human beings, yeah, there's no such thing as authentic love for others. We do things for others, right, because we want something in return.
And what part of it are you saying that do you agree?
I'm posing that question to you guys.
I suppose what you just said.
What?
In regards to the last part of it, or the whole section that you just.
Okay. What is your understanding? Do you agree with that?
I mean, thing is,
I was posing questions. I wasn't doing answers.
Okay, I mean, some of the things that I think there's a balance, right? Because I think we can go round and round on certain things, because I think there is a religious aspect and there's a human aspect. For example, when you talked about, I mean, because I practice that, and I actually see, I mean, obviously, for as a Muslim, when I've trained with them, I was shocked the things they're talking about, because, obviously it didn't settle well with me. But I realized, for example, breastfeeding.
No, I'm asking a specific question to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I'm talking about whether you agree with the concept of Freud's understanding that as human beings, we are selfish by nature.
I think there is some,
because philosophically that's problematic. That can be problematic.
Because I think there is a part of, because when we talk about the selfishness and self-centeredness, we divide these two. There's a self-centeredness which is actually problematic, because we cannot be self-centered. There's a different thing about selfishness is sometimes self-preservation for one to go on in life, but self-centeredness is a problematic issue, which is all about me, all about narcissism. Yeah, so something we separate actually. So there is a lot more than just being selfish. There's self-centeredness, which is an issue that we look into, because this is unhealthy. But selfishness, we think about is as self-preserving, and
I get that. I get that and I agree. I get that and agree. Like the way I would describe it is that from the Islam perspective, we are self-focused and not self-centered.
That's right.
So we are self-focused.
There is a difference. Yeah, there is a difference.
Yeah. I'm not. I'm not necessarily talking about that. But by nature, are we? By nature, are we like? Because Freud's understanding of psychoanalysis here was, looking inward, intrapsychic. Yeah.
Okay, so
about relationship with others and society and whatnot.
Yeah. For example, I just
in order to, like, for example, another problem that we have with Freud is that in order, to resolve any issue, that salvation, right, from the Islamic perspective, is not found inward. Yeah, even from the Jewish and Christian perspective, right, salvation, right, our well-being, right, is not found inward. It's really very important point to understand.
From the spiritual point, absolutely. From the spiritual point of view, definitely. We look to Allah for every little inch of our every breath we take. We look into we rely on Him. However, when, for example, I'm just looking at the model of health there. So individualism and interdependence, yeah. But that is, we're talking about.
I'm talking about Freud's psychoanalysis. I'm not talking about what you understand from.
I'm looking at that slide there. What is talking about individualism, because individualism and interdependence. So, example, if we take those two words, interdependency in, for example, codependency. When people when they rely on each other as a human being, not spiritual realm, but as a human being, like they in a family cluster.
I'm not talking about that. I think there's a misunderstanding here. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about people do rely on, Freud didn't say that people don't rely on others. He's not talking about that. And
yeah,
I'm not talking
about God. Obviously, he's.
No. I'm talking about when we look at the model of health, yeah, and how even the psychoanalysis, right, is, to simplify, is looking inwards, yeah. So you look at the model of psychotherapy, yeah, the model of it's always looking at the inwards, yeah. Even look at the modern concept of yoga or meditation and whatnot. It's looking at inwards. And that whether we know it or do not know it, or acknowledge or not acknowledge it, I feel that this philosophy is really, really enshrined within contemporary psychologies and counseling model. I'm not saying from the example perspective that we don't look inwards. I'm not saying that. We know, for example, if there's a tradition that says that, man arafa nafsahu arafa rabbahu, whoever knows himself knows his Lord. Whoever man arafa rabbahu arafa nafsahu. I'm not denying that. I think there's an unhealthy focus in that.
We see that in the society, right now, individualistic society, narcissistic society, we've created that ourselves. And actually, a lot of psychologists now are talking about this, is that we have actually shoot ourselves in the foot by creating this kind of lifestyle for ourselves. And now we're at the mercy of it. Actually, we're now suffering as a result.
Thank you for that. I want to quickly go through a couple of comments. So thank you for that, Sister Maya. Really helpful. Is hypnotherapy haram? No, not necessarily. No. Some people say it's haram, and I think they misunderstand hypnotherapy. And I think hypnotherapy is really, really good if it's done properly. What is hypnotherapy? Is the power of suggestion. What is counseling? Is power of suggestion. Right? Hypnotherapy is the power of suggestion. Yeah. Like when people think. When people talk about hypnotherapy, when we look at films and what they look at Paul McKenna hypnotherapy. In the 90s, probably, if you're old, if you remember, Paul McKenna was very famous. That ITV and BBC, they had the programs where he would take a group of people and would hypnotize them, and he would make them do silly things. That's not true. That's not real, by the way. That doesn't happen. It's fake, right? Hypnotherapy is a power of suggestion. Counseling, right, is a power of suggestion. The way you do it, right, it can be very effective. I think counseling, underlying, advertisement. We look at advertisement, for example, is a power of suggestion, right? When we look at a person who is very articulate, or listen to a person who's articulate, right? We look at a speaker, for example, yeah, very articulate and whatnot. What I've observed sometimes, right, the audience may not understand, right, much of what the speaker is saying, but the speaker is so articulate and using words so nicely. You know, the American accent people love, right? People, audience may not understand fully what he or she is saying, but because they're very articulate and the words, the rhythm that they're using, right, they are hypnotized, right? And they're influenced by what that person is saying. So hypnotherapy essentially is a power of suggestion. So it's not haram in my opinion. I know Shaykh Akram Nadwi and others, they said, I think there's a misconception of what hypnotherapy is. There's people mix, a lot of Islamic websites, they mix facts and fiction. They mix facts and fiction. Another point, Sister Shamima Begum said, to some extent it is true. Even as Muslims, we do things for others, but we hope our reward lies with Allah. Therefore, we are doing good with self-interest in mind. But you can reach a level of Iman where you genuinely love for your brother. We have very good question, very good point. Now, the highest level, there are 4 levels of consciousness. The highest level, right? The highest level is, the Iman, Ihsan, right? That we worship God, we serve God as though we see God in front of us, even if we don't see him, that we know that he sees us. That we don't, that's why some of the classical scholars and the Sufis and the people of Tasawwuf, they would say that they worship, they reach a level that they worship God. They don't, they worship God because of love of God, right? They worship God because out of love of God, not because they want Jannah or avoid paradise, avoid the hellfire, right? So yeah, but the difference here with Shamima, just to add on your point, the difference is that from the Islamic perspective, when it comes to our worship, for example, right? These are like paradise, to give a basic example, is it physical, like, right? Is it material? Paradise is not material. Like, we don't see paradise now. Yeah, we don't see paradise now. So, from that perspective, right? We are not doing things because we want something in return in this world. We are doing things because we want to, as you said, gain rewards and gain connection and closeness to God in the hereafter. Yeah. So from the Islamic perspective, the Prophet said that the hadith that لا يؤمن أحدكم, as you mentioned, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. So what I love for myself, I would not attain the highest level of Iman until I love for what I love for myself, I love for my brother and sister. And you can apply that to a counseling therapy session in a very basic level. When our clients come, right, and for me to want for the client good health and well-being, because I want good health and well-being for myself. Yeah. Final comment, and we'll continue, inshallah. In terms of defense mechanism, can they be applied within Islamic counseling? I think so, yeah, because the clients sometimes in a classroom setting, or clients, they do, for example, they project people as human beings. So those things are not, not bad. We can apply that from the Islamic perspective, right? But the philosophy behind it is problematic. That makes sense. Yeah. Like, for example, a person studies all night. Yeah. Right. But the person has a lot of sexual drives, right? Sexual instincts. Yeah. And the person who's studying all night, is, you would say to that person, no, you are sublimating, right? And you have all these urges and sexual feelings, and you are channeling it towards your study. Philosophical understanding behind is problematic, in my opinion. But when it comes to, for example, projection, as an example, right? Projection is what the feelings I have, right? I project onto others. Yeah. Displacement is, as an example I gave you, a person attaches a feeling towards another person. So a person got sacked from work, or has given a hard time from the boss, comes and kicks the lounge, or kicks the the bed, or kicks the dog, right? So you can be a conscious Muslim with high level iman, taqwa and ihsan, yet still be unconscious of your patterns of relating and behavior which stem from Freudian defense mechanism. Not necessarily, no. So that's where, inshallah, tomorrow we're going to go into that a bit more. As human beings, we, as Muslims, I'm talking about from the Muslim perspective, right? There are, certain things which are hidden inside our memory. Yeah. Sometimes we remember, sometimes we don't remember. Sometimes, sometimes very regular, certain things happen and remember certain events that took place in the past. So that's not, I'm not saying Islam denies that. What Islam says that we are not defined by that. Yeah. That we, Freud said we are defined by that. Our personality is defined by that. But Islam says we're not defined by that. We're not deterministic. That's a major difference. It doesn't mean that as human beings, like for example, if I have certain feelings towards someone, right, or feelings within me, sometimes I can try and project onto others. That can happen, right? But that's more a practical level. From a philosophical underlying issue, I think it's problematic from the Islamic perspective. Yeah? So let's continue. We don't have much time. I do want to get through a few more slides today. And this is really important, actually. The motor abnormality. And look, Freud. What did Freud say? That we are all pathological. Yeah. As I said, right. From the Islamic perspective, we can't deny. We'd be foolish. We can't deny that certain things that take place in our life, even in our childhood, does not impact our psychology. Or as I said, and over I emphasize, we are not defined by that. We're not deterministic. Yeah, our personality is not defined by that. Or should not be defined by that. Yeah. And the psychoanalysis contains that root. To summarize again, the root of much of our psychopathology can be found in aberrant psychosexual development. Yeah. In particular, aggressive or sexual impulses are major determinants of our neurotic tendencies. This is not consistent with the thrust of the Islamic framework. The Islamic framework is multifaceted: the biological, the psychological, the spiritual, the social, and behavioral. Yeah, and sin has a major role in our psychopathology. Even B.F. Skinner, Carl Rogers, they disagreed. They said that Freud is very deterministic, right? But B.F. Skinner, he went on the other extreme. He mainly focused on the behavior, right? Well, Islamic perspective is more holistic. So it's biological, it's psychological, it's spiritual, social, as well as behavioral. Now, I want to have I know it's 6 o'clock, but as we said in the website, that we may need to extend it here and there, inshallah. So, shall I give another 10 to 15 minutes and then we'll end. I do want to have a discussion here. It's really, really important. And I didn't want to write it on the document or on the slides, give you all the things. I want to have a discussion and see how we understand it, because it's really, really important. Yeah. We literally have the last 2 slides left, inshallah. Yeah. So how do sin or ma'asi affect mental health? Can a person who believes in God be depressed? Yeah. Can a mu'min believer who believes in God, believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can they face mental illness? Yeah. So what do you think? You can unmute yourself and just comments, right? The way the language, psychological mental health language. Again, this is, as I said, brothers and sisters, right? You know, there's a lot of things that I'm not able to kind of the time. As I said, this is an introductory course, but there's a lot of things that we need to explore, and we need to amalgamate. We need to contrast with the Islamic framework. Yeah, you may not find all of the answers today because it needs more deeper study and also discussion. Yeah? Going back to the beginning, what I said, that Freud emerged within a historical, socio-political, economic context. Yeah. Contemporary understanding of psychology or mental health, right? Post-industrial, revolution, yeah, right? Is, the Industrial Revolution completely revolutionized how we look at health and mental health. Before that, it was different in a way, because before that, before the scientific discoveries and before the post-industrial revolution, when when cities and civilization began to be established, people, their mental health practitioners, their psychologists were who? The priests and the imams from the Islamic perspective. Yeah, that's where we get conversational counseling from, right? From the Christian perspective, right? It was the Christians, the church, who established counseling in Europe, right? Freud and all the other guys, they're new, they're contemporary, right? But the Christian priest, the Christian understanding of the psyche and the personality, and people who had issues, whether it be psychological or spiritual, they'll go to who? They go to the priest. Yeah, in the Christian European countries, as well in the Eastern countries, they'll go to the the peers, they'll go to the gurus, right? And they would speak and they'll discuss and they would formulate answer. Post-industrial revolution, right? When things became more medicalized, when institutionalized, when cities began to develop, when institutions, college, university began to develop, right? Even in this country, right? Doctors, they viewed mental ill patients as barbaric. People in America, in Europe, in the UK, the way they would treat mentally patients by electrifying them, a lot of them lost their lives. They considered mental ill patients as animals, subhuman animals. But things changed when, post-industrial revolution, things changed when money came into the existence, right? The whole understanding completely changed. But that's another discussion, another time. Whereas from the Islamic perspective, right? If you look at Imam Ghazali, if you look at even the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, and Harith al-Muhasibi, yeah, one of the first earlier scholars who wrote on, I would say, Islamic psychology and spirituality, right? Imam Ghazali, Ibn Qayyim Jawziyah, right? Before Freud, before the Industrial Revolution, right? They understood psychology. They understood, although they may not have used the conventional common terminologies, but they understood psychology, and they would go, patients would go, people would go, and the issue would be resolved with them. Now, Freud did not believe in religion, right? So when we look at the DSM, how they were established, and there are a lot of criticism about the DSM, right? DSM is the manual is taken, right, as the holy grail, the Bible of mental health, all the different issues categorizations, right? But if you look at a lot of critical writings are out there, how they form, they're not very scientific. Some people get together and they wrote the manuals. It's not universal. You can't really apply. It's very Eurocentric, right? It's very secular. You can't really always apply every single thing from the religious perspective. On top of that, and a lot of the issues that we may look at from the Islamic perspective, they were not considered problematic. Yeah, they were not considered problematic. For example, sin. Where does sin come from? Where is sin placed in the understanding of the framework of mental health or mental illness? Freud did not acknowledge that. Imam Ghazali, as an example, Imam Ghazali, for example, he said mental disorders in his Ihya. This is Imam Ghazali by then. Mental disorders emanate, right, from many different angles, many different perspectives. But from one perspective is that distancing oneself from God, and committing injustices against God, right? I.e., sinning against God. And the Quran and the Sunnah. You can look at the verses of the Quran. Look at, for example, when Allah says, "Fi qulubihim marad, fazadahum Allah marada," that in their hearts there is a disease. Allah increased the disease. The munafiqeen, the characteristics of munafiqeen, how the psyche works in the Quran. You know, those kind of things they will not accept, right? Because it's coming from a spiritual perspective. So again, this is a brief outline again. Even in the UK, the way, like, you know, sin language, before people talked about sin, or, you know, the Christian, they talked about sin, but now language is more towards like crime, the word crime, yeah, not sin. So even on the language perspective, the way it has changed, right? It impacts us. So Muslims who are living in this society definitely will be impacted. Definitely, you know, either we acknowledge it or not. I know a lot of people will not acknowledge it, but we will be impacted. Now, some of them are positive, yeah, we take. Some of them are positive. Some of them are also, some of them are negative, yeah. So can a believer suffer from depression, or, you know, I'm not defining what depression is, by the way, or, that's another discussion. Can a believer suffer from depression? So Sister Saliha Islam says, yes, they can, right? Other question to ask: if a person commits sins over and over again, can that contribute to the person's psychological problems or mental disorders? I'm talking about, you know, from the Islamic perspective. Okay, so Safura said yes, they can. Anyone disagree? Others agree. Anyone else? Anyone disagree? The soul has impact on mental health. Inshallah, we're going to discuss, tomorrow is really important. We're going to discuss the Islamic human psychological mainframe. Yeah, and again, I'm going to summarize it in a nutshell. So yes, they can. The soul has impact on mental health. Yeah. Anyone disagree? Again, it's a safe space. If you disagree, it's fine. You will not be reprimanded or anything. If you disagree, it's fine. Okay. So you know, from what I understand of mental health, mental illness, and what I've studied, and the Islamic perspective, what I've studied, yes, they can. And that's something as Muslim or Islamic counselors, we need to really develop. How do they impact, and what can be done? Our scholars actually have written down. Our scholars have done that already, subhanAllah. Most of it. What we need to do is contextualize it, or relevantise it, meaning look at from a psychological perspective. People like, as I said, you know, Imam Ibn Qayyim Jawziyah. I mean, his book, Madarij as-Salikin, has been translated into English now. At his first one or two volumes. Really good book. Really good book, right? I mean, Ghazali was brilliant, right? Ibn Rushd and others, they were brilliant from a psychological perspective, right? Ibn Sina, Rumi, and others, they were brilliant. But what I found, you know, they provided the theoretical perspectives. What I found is that Imam Ibn Jawziyah, he provides a theory as well as the practical. His writings are amazing. His writings are amazing. And from a psychological perspective, I remember one scholar from Canada, a while back, he was doing PhD on psychology or something related to that. And what he told us was that all he done in his thesis is that go to the works of Ibn Qayyim Jawziyah and translate it, contextualize it. That's what he done, and he got his PhD, right? So our scholars have done that already. Right? What we need to do, Islamic counsel or Muslim counselors, is that develop that and contextualize it. What I'm seeing, unfortunately, is that what we're doing, we only kind of a lot of people. For example, some of the writers you will see books on Islamic counseling, they actually, in my understanding, incorrectly, they're saying the id, as we discussed, the id, right? The ego and the super ego, like the Nafs al-Ammara bi-Su, Nafs al-Lawwama. Yes, there are some similarities. But that's not how Freud understood it. That's probably because you're mixing psychoanalysis, Freud understanding, and your Islamic understanding and whatnot. But that's not how Freud understood it. So that's we need to kind of really, that's why it's really important that this kind of courses happen, why we can really go into the philosophical, theological, psychological assumptions that people have made. And I said it's based on a subjective personal understanding. Yeah, as a, you know, so I'm going to come back to the final slide in a moment, inshallah. I'm going to that. So yes, Sister Hasina Munta is saying absolutely you can, particularly if they are constantly trying to fight the urge to sin, then I imagine this would have a very detrimental and damaging impact. So, you know, we discussed shahwa and hawa in the Quran. I'm going to go into that tomorrow more. Yeah. Shahawat, as I said, they follow their desires, their lust, you know, desires for money, desire for women, desire for, you know, gluttony, for fame and whatnot. And that, you know, that has made them, right, forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not only that, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen, Allah said in the Quran, have you seen the one who takes his caprice, shahwa, his desire as his God? Right? So people in this society began to self-worship. That's what I mean by individualistic. We look inward for the answers. We look inward for their salvation. When people meditate, for example, and talk about mindfulness, look at inward. Where does the answer come from? It comes from me. No, it doesn't come from me. It comes from God. It comes from the Quran, from the Hadith. Right? We are vessels. Yeah, we are vessels. We are vehicles. Yeah, that God uses. The body that we have, now, we don't own. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if they are not, so Sister Hasina is continuing, even if they are not constantly trying to fight, okay, I think I read that right, to sin, we know and believe that it goes against the natural fitrah, so there would be a tussle, even excellent comment. There would be a tussle even with that person being aware. Yes. Yes. But if you want to really go into it, right? When a person sins, that person knows, is aware, conscious that that's a sin. Right? When a person sins in Islam, that person knows that that's a sin. But the person does it anyway. What, right? Because it is in allowing his lowly nafs or allowing his shahwa to overpower him. Yeah. So that person is still conscious. Right? Now, you know, Freud might say, okay, you know, if I want to use that example, he's sinning because there's underlying issues. There's issues in the development. Well, I find that problematic, right? That's not correct. But because a believer, a Muslim, sins because iman is low at that moment, and we know iman fluctuates up and down. There's ghafla in that moment, right? The Prophet said, right? A believer, right? He's not a believer. Is not a believer while he is drinking. The scholars answered that if a believer drinks alcohol, it doesn't mean he becomes a disbeliever, but at that moment, iman is low. He's becoming a state of ghafla. But he knows that the drinking is haram, but he said does it because he's given into his urges, his shahwa. Yeah, hope that's clear, inshallah. So let's go to the final slide, inshallah. So we discussed the model of psychotherapy quite extensively. What even non-Muslim scholars, what they say is very indirect, is very long and expensive. Not everyone can afford it. Classical psychoanalysis. But I'm going to cover some cases, and I'll see. You know, I'll give you one example of, and you know, some of the writers they mention, you know, that Freud actually himself, that he for 3 years he done psychoanalysis on himself, but he did not have many clients. He didn't discuss with other therapists, right? He had few clients and whatnot, but you know, they would say that, you know, how can you prove that your method works? So he goes to the client and says, you know, look, you know, he has a session with the client, and he goes to the client, you know, your you are identifying these concerns and issues because there were issues with your childhood. Maybe your mother was overly protective, or your father was, blah 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 blah. And the client, it's very elastic. It's very vague. And the client says, yeah. You're right. And then Freud would say, oh, there you go. I prove my method. That was his understanding of a scientific investigation. Obviously, others later him they said, no, that's not a thorough investigation. And it's impractical. Classical psychoanalysis, is very, very long. It's indirect. It allows the client to go into areas that they may not go into. They may not need to go into, right? In other words, it allows the client to create their own reality for themselves. Yeah, as counselors, as clients, people, they create their own realities for themselves. It's outside the reality that other people live in. So when we allow the client to go into this way and that way, and we take a little thing and focus on that little thing, right? For example, I don't know, when I was a child, the clients might say that the teacher did not. When I raised my hand a few times, the teacher did not, listen to me or point at me, right, for the answers. And because of that, I've developed issues in my adulthood. So when a therapist focuses on that, it can create unknowingly a different set of realities for that client, right? That's why Islam says have husnul dhan, right? Because our perception is very, very powerful. What we perceive to be reality may not be the actual reality, because we can create our own reality for ourselves. And what Shaitan does, Shaitan comes and he decorates those thoughts and decorates those actions and makes them powerful. Yeah, but again, we'll go into that tomorrow, inshallah. And I'll give you one example. This is what we discuss remains within us, inshallah. So I had a client, and that client, faced a lot of difficulties, early years when they were young, teenagers, right? So that client, before coming to me, has been going through a psychodynamic counselor for about 7 to 9 months every week. Yeah. And it was helping, but here and there, but they were not able to understand what the issues are. Yeah. And this is after 7, 8, 9 months. So I had about 1 or 2, 3 issues. My third session, identify what the main issues are. Yeah, there were issues in the childhood, definitely, right? The other therapists, they did identify, but they were not able to give the client, over nearly a year, tools, right, or take that person from A to Z. Yeah. And that person is going. Yes, there are some, insights happening. There are some awakenings taking place, definitely, right? But overall, they were facing problems in their marriage, with their children, with their other extended family. A third session, I identified. 4th, 5th, 6th session, I'm not seeing them anymore, right? So look, you can't. What the other therapist was doing, dwelling upon what happened 20 years ago, over and over and over and over and over again. And every time happens, this is what happened in the past. Every time difficulties arises in the marriage or in the family setting, in the workplace and stuff, going back to the old case. So the guy is not able to move. So meaning that we are not beings that are determined by our past. Yes, our past has impacted our psychology, but we're not determined by that. And if you, as a therapist, if you over focus on that, it's problematic. And I feel that even though that people who go to those sort of therapists will find some peace, right? I feel that the underlying issues are not resolved, because always focusing on what happened before, always focusing on what happened of the past, always looking at what others have done for you, right? So I think that can be very problematic, and I found that it can be very, very problematic. And I mean, after nearly a year, that client was, every week going, and did not really. I'm not. Look, therapy is it can be subjective, in the sense that what might work for one client may not work for other clients. I found that the clients that I have and I've had is that the same approach that I've applied is active directive approach, right? It works, it goes to the heart of the problem, and it goes to resolve the issue. The other issue is that people assume, final point, the model psychotherapy, people assume that normal human conditions are problematic. When I feel pain, I feel anxiety, right? I have to psychopathologize that, I have to medicalize that, I have to get medicine to overcome that. Sometimes it's just normal human condition, right? We face, right? As an example, if we don't have anxiety at some level, we'll not get up from bed and go to work. If I'm not anxious about losing my job, I'll not go out from bed and go to work. So we have to have some level of anxiety. What happens in our society, unfortunately, we overly focus on that, yeah, to the point that it becomes so subjective, right? Everything is what I feel and what I do. Well, it's not about me all the time, yeah. And what happens is that sometimes counselors, we as counselors and clients, we want others who are outside to behave in a certain way, the way we want them to behave, yeah. Again, going back to the point about creating our own reality for ourselves. Yeah, it's very subjective, it's very individualistic, yeah, and it's very detrimental, problematic to the human psyche. So with this, inshallah, again, very, very briefly, I'll end today. We'll go into tomorrow, inshallah, the Islamic framework. So any comments, your questions, please, inshallah. Okay, any questions for the sisters? Tomorrow, inshallah, as I said, we'll go into the Islamic, a little bit about the Islamic framework. So we discussed about some things what Islam says about Freudian understanding, but tomorrow we're going to very briefly the Islamic framework, the epistemology from the Islamic perspective. We'll look at how do we assess knowledge, very, very important. We'll look at how we approach man, human being, God, the universe, society. We'll look at the journey of the human being, pre-birth, life on earth, after death, our experiences. We'll look at the relationships, how that formed. We'll look at a model called, the diamond figure, the quadrant, relationships, inshallah. We'll look at the human psychological framework, and we'll go into the different aspects, the psychic ports, the psychic processor, psychic states, and the suluk, behavior, right? So we'll go into that tomorrow, and we'll go into some of the case studies examples. So hopefully, I know I had to rush some of the content, so apologies for that. Hopefully, inshallah, it was beneficial. I will continue tomorrow. If you don't have any comments or questions, inshallah. Inshallah, I look forward to completing tomorrow, inshallah. Yeah. Any comments, questions? Can you kindly send the slides before tomorrow's session, please? Inshallah, I'll get the admin to send us the slides, inshallah, before tomorrow, so you can have a read tonight, inshallah. how long will the recording be available? Inshallah, tomorrow I'll find out. I'll ask the admin, inshallah. And again, as I said, brothers and sisters, you'll not get all the answers here. This is an introductory course. It takes a lot of contemplation and thought. Some of the issues that I've discussed, here, and I raised there with some people, but they didn't understand it or didn't want to, acknowledge it, because we are so, as Muslims, because we live in a society, the way we are, as I said, we are products of our own society and context. Sometimes we acknowledge it, sometimes we don't acknowledge it. Sometimes, the things that we are influenced by are positive, which is good, but there are certain things which are negative. And we have the Islamic epistemology, we have the Islamic framework to sieve out the positive from the negative, inshallah. Inshallah, Jazakallah khair. And finally, inshallah, we'll discuss it tomorrow before we end. In particular, it's open for everyone. In particular, for the brothers and sisters, we've had about 51 people enrolled. I'm assuming that people will listen to the recordings after. So we had 51 people enrolled, which is a really good number. What I want to do, in particular, for people who are therapists, counselors, and psychologists, in particular counselors and therapists, is after the course continue this process, inshallah. So kind of like an Islamic supervision. I've got a group of some of my students who go through some Islamic supervision, inshallah, monthly. So I'm happy to offer that to this group, in particular to those people, brothers and sisters who are therapists and counselors. The way it works is online at the moment. 2 hours every month. You bring in your case studies and we discuss it and give. I try, from what I understand and know, the Islamic framework, inshallah. What I will do, I'll send the group WhatsApp group link tomorrow, and those ones who join can join that tomorrow, inshallah. Inshallah, there will be other courses that hopefully I'll be doing. I'm going to be developing I've developed a course, but hopefully later on during the year, the model I developed, very basic model, the art model, akhlaq restoration therapy. Inshallah, there will be a course, online course for that. That will be a 2-weekend course, inshallah. And this is for everyone, for particular counselors and therapists. And after doing certain modules, hopefully you will get, from the Islamic perspective at least, from me, the LIPC license, the Licensed Islamic Professional Counselor license, inshallah. Yeah. So we'll discuss that tomorrow and in the future, inshallah. It's for those who want to pursue that line, inshallah. So thank you, brothers and sisters. Anything I said good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any mistakes I've made is from myself, and I seek protections and protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and forgiveness from him, the mistakes that I have made, inshallah. Until tomorrow again, 3 p.m. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.